You're listening to Super Power Up with multidimensional master, superpower expert, and former counterintelligence agent, Tonya Dawn Recla. If you're ready to disrupt reality, then sit down, strap in, and prepare to experience the show that proves there is no spoon.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Dawn Recla, your superpower expert, and I am delighted you all are in for a super yummy treat here today. So we're talking today. I'm not even going to tell you who we're talking to. Of course, you know already because it's in the materials. But right now, just go with me on this. So today we're going to be talking about finding spiritual intelligence in folklore. And the reason we're talking about this today is because I think it's so easy for people to kind of feel like they're walking these like two different paths, right? They've got like their spiritual existence over here, but then they've got real life over here. Real life typically means bills and jobs and responsibilities. And the biggest challenge in this work and in these journeys is figuring out how to integrate all of that together and make the magical and the mystical your real life, right? Because we're taught that that's not possible. And in so many ways, we're taught that and programmed that, and it feels very irresponsible, and we have to be adults, and adult means you have to be miserable and all of these other things, right? And so many of us are walking a completely different journey, and we take that seriously. You know, we're going to show you that it's possible. We're going to tell you how it's possible. We're going to talk about how we got there and what our journeys led us to and why we think it's important for the collective and the planet and everything else going on, and where all of the magic and the solutions and the miracles lie is on the other side of that integration. And so while it's easy to kind of wipe it away as like, oh no, we're going to talk about stories. We are our stories. You know, our world is crafted by stories, and we've been telling some pretty crappy stories. And so I, for one, am in the mood to tell some better ones. And the way that we do that is even entertain the notion that there is a different way to go about things, and that it is okay to do, and we can be courageous in that. And this woman we're speaking to today is, you know, single-handedly lighting the way and guiding us all into this space in such a beautiful, beautiful way. Ayn Cates Sullivan, Dr. Ayn Cates Sullivan, she has a master's degree, a PhD. She knows this stuff. She's lived it. She's walked it. She writes it. She guides others into it. And what she's doing is taking those kind of juxtaposed or seemingly juxtaposed worlds and saying, wait, but look how one informs the other. And we had a delightful pre-recorded conversation that we probably should have just recorded. But we're gonna enliven that for you all, for the audience. But she's won no less than over 30 literary awards for her work in mythology and folklore. And so the second a piece of your mind wants to chime in and think, oh well, this is just, you know, fluffy whatnot. Let's really let that sink in for a second. In the study of this, in the work of this, we are nothing but our worlds are shaped by nothing but our stories. And if we don't get that and take some ownership and responsibility for it and start looking at where were there other stories and how were those shaped and why did those come about and what have we forgotten and what are we not carrying forward, then we're really missing an opportunity for the richness of this, the world that all of us sense exists, but maybe we're not seeing right in front of our faces. So I'm really, really excited about this conversation, and I invite you to just play with us during this call. Just forget what you think you know about how reality works and how things come together, and just sit in this moment with us and say, what if? You know, what if we can just play in the magic and be in that and really use that and work it and be in that here. And I think you're going to find a really rich experience with us today. So thank you for joining us. And Ayn, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm very, very excited about this new soul sister I found here. And I'm excited about the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to it.
So I know that, like, in my excitement, I didn't mention that you're the author of 10 books, that you know, you write about Legends of the Grail, the Heroine of Avalon. Like I probably missed some pretty important details, but I think it'll come out as we get talking, because you're such a wealth of information and you hold and carry so much that as a collective we all need right now. And so know that I'd love, my intention is to get into that. But first, we're going to ask you our question. What are your superpowers?
Well, my superpowers are in the realm of air. And so if you think for a moment, I have this very long, thin swan feather with a pointed tip. And my superpowers come through when I call the swan. And so we're going to just shift for a moment into this realm of the imaginal to start here straight away. Because in the Celtic tradition, what happens when you call upon the wild swan? You can go down to the edge of the lake, and it's right at sunset, and you call the wild swan to you, and she might give you one of her feathers. And if you're lucky, and if you're looking for something that might be lost in your soul or in your psyche, something that's happened, you can board the white swan. You climb upon her back, and she flies between the cracks of the world. And all night long, you fly with the swan as she turns black, and you gather up all the pieces of your soul from the times that you've had shock and trauma or upset, whatever's happened to you. And you gather up all those pieces, and as the sun rises, you fly back in. She turns white again, and you have arrived whole, your grail, your true self, with your swan feather. So that's my superpower, to fly with the white swan.
Wow, that is a wonderful, lovely superpower. And I so honor you and appreciate you for sharing it as generously as you do with the world. And through your books, right? Through your writing. How did you get drawn into that as your medium?
Oh, well, with your wonderful daughter that you have, you'll understand this. When I was 8 years old, I walked upstairs and I said to my parents, "I'm on earth to be a mystic poet." And they said, "I don't know how you're going to make money doing that."
That's nice to hear.
Right. That's why I'm here.
Oh, that's awesome.
And on it went. I mean, it really, I think when we're on our life purpose and mission, when we can really tune into it, even if it seems outrageous, if we follow it, the red carpet unfolds. So I got a fellowship to Columbia, and I got overseas research award to King's College London, and then I was given stipends to go collect folklore. I wasn't even really planning on collecting folklore. It's just what rolled out, and it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Just the richness in that, I can imagine. I'm laughing because I remember Neva was about 2, maybe 3, and she woke up and in the morning and came to me and demanded to know what a soulmate is. And I was like, "What?" She goes, "What's a soulmate?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She had this vision, this dream of her sister with a mate, and she kept telling Neva that it was her soulmate, but Neva sensed that it wasn't a good fit for her, and she was just fit to be tied. And she's like, "I need to understand what this is." And I'm like, "Of course you do. Like, why not?" And our rule, just our rule in our house is kind of bit. If she asks the question, then she's ready to hear the information. And so we, of course, we talked to her about it and everything else. And she was just livid. It was I'm like, "Oh, I think we're getting an indicator of where this one's going."
I think it's great.
So
and
I can see that.
I think if we can keep not only our own children awake and alive and allow them to ask these questions that might seem really outrageous, but they're great questions, it keeps our own wondrous inner child alive too. Because in folklore, like Percival, you have to ask the right questions to get the Holy Grail, even if they seem outrageous. And so our culture does like to shut things down, and I think our job is to just bust it right back open. Let's let the kid ask those questions. Let's ask. We want to get the answer. It's okay.
I think that's a good descriptor of at least what my experience with it has been. Like, we're just going to walk right through this, I think. And it's having the courage, speaking exactly to what you just said. Like, I have this living, breathing mini me mirror every single moment of what I'm both healing and rewriting my past through her. I'm watching others do the same. Like, and if you allow for it to, you see so much of yourself in everyone, but undeniably, I think in the ones closest to us, we would be fools to not see the synchronicities of, the patterns that come forward,
Absolutely.
The words, the curiosities, and just, this is, you and I talked a little bit before the call about a method that we use called the inside out game. And part of the reason why we do that is we train people to use their internal experiences, their internal world, and their external world kind of overlaid on top of each other. Because it creates this really rich environment for full comprehension of who we are and what we're experiencing and what we create. And when you look to your children, you see the complexities and all of the layers that we exist in. And then of course you get into concepts like oneness, and you start to play with that, and it's like, whoa, but you are me and I am you, and it's like, whoa, what's happening here? Did I create you? Did you create me? And we have some really interesting dinner conversations because of it. But the wealth of experience, the richness of the experience overrides any fear that we're all just crazy and drink the same Kool-Aid. And so at some point there is this crossover where you're like, I wouldn't go back to living in that kind of more limited, fearful space, no matter what somebody offered me at this stage. But I can remember in that transition thinking that it was like this life or death, like this, what am I doing? And oh my gosh, like I'm getting ready to jump into this abyss and I don't have any idea what I'm doing. And then you get there and you're like, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal. And this is pretty natural. Like this feels kind of cool, And so it's, a lot of you I know listening to the show are facing that exact decision. Like, are you going to have the courage and invoke the courage to kind of step into it? And I think the work that Ayn does in the world around the heroes and the heroines is like, what can we pull from that? How do we gain courage and awareness and insight and maybe even instruction, if you will? Like, how do we do this from those stories? And they came to our collective consciousness for a reason. How do you, I know you work with folks in terms of integrating some of these concepts into their existence. How did you like to come up and say, okay, I'm going to be a mystical poet, but then to be like, oh, and I'm also going to guide others to use this information in a real way here in the world. Like, how did that unfold for you?
That's a big question. There's one thing I want to bring forward just now. It's a term, and I think it's important for people to know. It's called ontological shock. And I'll say it again, it's ontological shock. And it's a term we need to know when we're in the process of awakening. So that would be more from my psychological side. I have a master's in spiritual psychology. But the thing is this, when you start to wake up, so collectively there hasn't been a way for medicine women and medicine men or people who have visions to really operate well in this culture. There tend to be, we tend to call them crazy. And if you go into indigenous cultures, those people are shaman, or they're druids, or they're something. They hold a vision for the collective. And for some reason we lost that. So part of what I feel the awakening is allowing a lot of the pieces, like we're talking about the white swan, to allow those pieces that might really be very powerful pieces. Our ability not only to see externally, but to see the in-world. So we were talking about the in-world and the external world. So when I work with people, what I help them do is develop a very strong connection through meditation practices and visualizations and so forth to their inner realms, and don't be surprised if you're in deep meditation and you hear a message. No, you're not schizophrenic. Nope. There's actually such thing as inner guidance, and it does come from within, and when you're on a quest, I take people on heroine's quests, which you actually do with your 2 feet, but you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared and have this, I want people to be 60% in and 40% out. Then you can be very creative, very solid. You know who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
We talk a lot about, a lot of people love the expansion game, right? They want to go high and out, and they want to like discover things. And as long as it's outside of themselves, they're comfortable doing it. And we contend that you can only go as far up and out as you're willing to go down and deep. And that's that inside out game, is like, you'll always hit a threshold of your ability to comprehend and to live and embody stuff if you're not willing to go even deeper within yourself and shine light on those shadows and look in the darkness and see what's there, and use the techniques that you're learning in that expansive space internally also. And that's that a lot of people aren't real comfortable with that, because we're trained, not to look too closely at ourselves. God only knows what you might find there.
Exactly. In some way, we've been a severed tree. In the Celtic tradition, one thing that's really lovely, if you look at it, is that there's the tree of life that they have in that particular tradition. You have usually it's an oak tree and or an ash, and it goes all the way up, and then it's reflected in its roots below. So you have one circle that's a tree, and the roots of the tree are just as important as the branches and the leaves, and of course also the trunk. And so when you're working with developing the inner world, we usually actually start with the roots. In the Celtic tradition, they actually have, and this is sort of more Welsh tradition, but they call the underworld a place called, it's a noon in some traditions. And in Arthurian legend, you ride to the underworld to find your hallows. And if you think about it sort of more practically in this stage, you're finding your sort of truth. And that's just basically your ability to be discerning. When you're with someone, are they, can you trust them? Are they telling you the truth? So you need that ability, which is sort of an airy ability to be able to read someone and trust them. And you need your spear. Those are both sort of masculine qualities. Your spear is your ability to receive insight, but also your ability to act. And so if you're a warrior, you really definitely need your spear. You need your fire. And then there are two feminine qualities. So my series that I just finished is the Grail, and that's the watery quality. And so if you're working with Grail, it's feeling, and it's about intuition, and it's about realizing that your body, if you can really trust your body to tell you what's happening. You can walk into a place and if you feel comfortable or you feel uncomfortable. And if you can really learn that, we can learn to listen to ourselves. We know where to walk. We know not to be in certain places where something's going to happen. And we know to be in other places where good things are going to happen. And so really learning to trust ourselves has not been part of what we've really been doing in our culture, but something that's very important, especially for our children. And then the fourth part of that would be the hallow, would be the crystal or the stone. And if you think about it, it's just getting your feet on the earth. This lovely earth that we're on, that we really need to learn to walk in harmony with. And so one of the things that I started doing with collecting folklore, and it surprised me. That's why I was back to the ontological shock. When I was collecting folklore in Ireland, first of all, I thought there'd be a ton of people there, all these famous characters. Nobody was there except like sheep and cows and.
Wait a second.
Wait a second. So, I'm walking in these it's raining, there's this occasional crow flying past, and so you can when you're alone and you're in the forest, and I'm in the edge of the Western world. So here it is, the west of Ireland, and you just got the Atlantic on the other side, all the way across to the United States. And the trees kind of creak. They're kind of, you can even see them. They're twisted and kind of gnarled. And I was looking at this one particular Turlough, which is a seasonal lake, and it's where W.B. Yeats is a very famous poet, Irish poet. And I was looking at the lake going, I completely understand why the wild swans of Cool came from this lake, why that poem arose here. And it was at that moment that I went, there are stories that are etched into the land. And when we stand in those places, we know what's come before. And it's a very sort of bardish, Irish thought pattern. And I know I came back to my tutor at King's College London, and I'm talking to her about it, and she's like, don't put that in your thesis. We're going to stick to fact, and it was funny because when I did do my academic thesis, but this is, you'll enjoy this. It took me ages to get this thesis together. It just, getting a PhD in England at King's College London is not easy. First of all, you have to use the English language, not Americanisms, but even the spelling, right? So, and you have to prove that you're an expert in a field. Meanwhile, I'm going around with my daughter, who was, I think, 2 or 3 at the time, and she's like your daughter. She's walking over to the sacred stones, and she's putting her hands on them and going, Mom, the stone sings,
Oh, how funny.
Right? Can you hear what it's saying to you? And I'm meanwhile loving it. So when I finally put this series together that I just finished this Hera of Avalon tales, with Arthurian legend, and then some older Welsh goddesses, and then the earlier one, Legends of the Grail, stories of Celtic goddesses. Yeah, as I was doing this, I loved this play of the childlike quality and then the academia sort of merging together. It's giving me some kind of solidity. When I handed it to my tutor, I said, "You're not going to like what I've done. I've put these together in fictional form. I've done exactly what you've told me not to do." And she said, "Oh, it's fantastic. I love it. Can I write the foreword?" So, so I got away with it in the end.
How fun. I love it. I love it. Well, I want to hear so much more about this. We do need to take a quick break here. Where can people go to find out more about you?
Oh, you can go onto my website, and my first name is spelled A-Y-N. So if you type in A-Y-N, I generally come up. Ayn Cates Sullivan, or AynCatesSullivan.com, and I've got events, and you can look at all my books that are up there, and podcasts, and contact me through there. So, and Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I'm easy to find.
Well, and we'll have links on the site here, folks. We're talking with Ayn Cates Sullivan about finding spiritual intelligence in folklore. I told you were in for a treat. So when we come back from the break, we're going to dive even more deeply into this work. So stay with us, folks. You don't want to miss it.
Are you here to change the world? Do you talk about things like vibration, frequency, awakening, and consciousness? Are you pretty sure you have superpowers? The Superpower Net is unlike normal coaching programs and conscious communities. We provide training, intuitive guidance, peer-to-peer learning, intensive one-on-one coaching, and a high vibrational network of people just like you. When you join the net, you get 24/7 access to a collaborative group of people who support you as you master your personal power and unlock your superpowers. If you're ready to use your superpowers to change the world, then join the Superpower Net today. Visit superpowerexperts.com/the net to learn more.
Awesome. We're back. You're listening to the Super Power Up podcast, the Disrupt Reality series. We're talking with Ayn Cates Sullivan today about finding spiritual intelligence in folklore. And as she identified prior to the break, like this wealth of information, right? The experiences we get to have, and what strikes me in listening to you is, first of all, I totally commiserate. I didn't get a PhD, but wrote 2 different master level theses, and I feel your pain. Like certainly not in the Queen's English for sure, but it's like it was a process and a half, right? Especially I think for those of us who love discovery, like I never felt like I had enough. Like what if there was one more stone I hadn't overturned? What if, it's like finally it was like you just have to start writing. And I'm like, no, like I loved the research and the discovery and just being in that space. The culminating of it got a little bit precarious, which actually is interesting, because one of the challenges we found in business when we came out of government was the divergent thinkers were having trouble converging around the divergent ideas, and convergent thinkers weren't divergent enough. And so it's interesting that I think is overlaid on top of this discovery process for divergence. We do tend to have a tendency to not necessarily want to encapsulate it and frame it and put it into time and space. And I really had to work through being okay with the fact that kind of good enough is good enough, and letting it be kind of time stamping it, to use a military term, and like the time and space continuum there of like, this is what it is right here, with the understanding that I have, knowing that it was going to change, knowing that it was more, knowing that there's always additional layers. But the convergence piece, especially when we're wanting to create change in the world, is so incredibly crucial, but it's so antithetical to how a lot of us walk through the world. And so that was kind of a real sidebar. Anyway, my question to you is in the, kind of fleshing this stuff out and really being in that. I know for me, there was a very clear moment of, am I willing to play? And given some of the worlds that I came from, that was more of a challenging question than maybe for some. It feels like your life had an element of play too, but surely I'm going to just kind of overlay my experience on top of yours, I guess. But was there a moment of like, how kind of deep down this rabbit hole am I willing to go? And, that exactly the ontological shock piece, like what is it that allows some of us to cross that threshold and others not to?
I think the ontological shock piece happens when you're in the forest and you actually meet a fairy. You know, when you go,
Mm-hmm.
maybe this isn't a make believe. That's the part where it
Well,
starts to
but some
mean.
people still wipe it away, right? Like, well, it was a flash of light or something in my eye or what. Like even
Mm-hmm.
in the face of the miraculous, people still disbelieve.
Well, if you think about it for a moment, like I really felt, and I'd like to tell you the story of Skayach to anchor this in, but just to sort of run up to it, you know, when you're these archetypes and say, like the last moment I'm standing in the West Ireland and I'm feeling this turla and I'm feeling this energy and the stories that are etched into the land, right? So it's you start to feel it in your body. You go, oh my goodness, you know, this is something maybe I haven't experienced before. They call these places the thin places. So you're standing there and you're feeling this and you go, you know, and that's the moment you can either shut it down, you can just shut it down and you just, okay, you stay in your normal reality, or you go, okay, I'm going to actually follow the mystic poets right here, and I'm going to go someplace that's unfamiliar. And at that point, you can open up to, like, the easiest way for us to think about them are an archetypal presence. Like we think of Merlin, you know, for instance, is Merlin will. There are people that carry the Merlin archetype. There are people that carry the King Arthur archetype or the Guinevere archetype. All of us tend to carry at least one archetype. And if actually we know what archetype we're carrying, we tend to know how our life is going to unfold. So that's kind of interesting. But back to the hero-heroine archetype, I want to share a story with you I think you'll enjoy. And it's in the first book, The Legends of the Grail, Stories of Celtic Goddesses. So in the Irish tradition, there's a very famous hero named Cuchulainn of Merhevna. It's quite a mouthful, but
That is a mouthful.
Now, Cuchulainn, he got his name because as a 10-year-old boy, he was such a ferocious warrior that a huge white dog attacked him, and he actually killed the dog. So he had to take the place of the dog. So he was known as the White Dog, Cuchulainn of Merhevna, and he had to defend a fortress as this child until he was ready to step into his true hero self. Now, Cuchulainn fell in love with this beautiful woman named Emer. And Emer was known, she was just known as the great beauty of Ireland. So she was, in all these Celtic traditions, you'll find that there's a May Queen, and she's just the flower of the land. And so he wants to go to marry her, and her father says, well, if you want my daughter, you're going to have to go and train with Skayach. And of course, everyone shudders because Skayach is this Scottish sorceress. She's a warrior goddess, and you don't know what's going to happen when you meet her. But Cuchulainn, being who he is, says, absolutely. So he jumps in his curragh, his little boat, and he sails through the Celtic Sea, and he gets up to the Isle of Skye, which is all covered in mist. And he looks across, and there's a 22-foot ravine that you have to jump. And being in the military, you'd understand this is a feat, right? So you have to jump
For sure.
across, right? And he's looking down, and he's seeing these skulls, and there's a sort of bucking bridge that leads up to it. And then there are these skulls, and he leaps. He does it. He makes the leap. And there she is standing, waiting for him. And she's got this long black hair, and she's got a dagger, and she's reading him. And she's going to see, is he a loser? Or is she going to throw him down into the rocks below? Or does he have what it takes to become a hero? And if that case, you know, she's going to lead him into the forest so that he can find his magic. So as he jumps, she goes, aha, this is the one I've been waiting for. And so she runs off into the forest. And in the story, he has to handle a bunch of different initiations that only the goddess of the land can give him, because you see, she's magical. And she has what he doesn't have. She can cast a glamour. She can talk to the wind. She can talk to the elements. She knows how to bring his magic to him so that when he's ready to fully go into battle, he has not only his masculine strength and prowess and organizational abilities and all these things, but he also has his feminine magic. So, right?
Well, it's in like the initiation stories, right? And that it's beautiful. And it's and one of my soapboxes for a while was around this kind of prolonged adolescence that we experience, I think, in a lot of developed countries, and where we've gotten away from any sort of initiation rites and kind of traversing and adventure, and these kind of there's a price, right? The price is being willing to step away from what you've known and step into this new, and there's this always this threshold that gets crossed, and I do think that we're lacking some of that, right? I remember, I had been, I got my master's degree, I had been a soldier, I was an agent, and then I got married, and then I had a kid. I'm like, at what point do I start feeling like an adult? Like, what is it that I have to do to where it like sinks into my brain that it's like, oh yeah, I'm an adult now? Because there's this just kind of, and maybe that is its test, honestly, is that until you're willing to kind of own that for yourself, it's not going to be put upon you externally. But there's value in it being a completely internal game. It's not required by society in most developed countries, but perhaps that's an evolved version of that. I don't know. I certainly didn't see it when I was standing on that soapbox. Like, it really felt like we had lost something pure and magical and powerful. But as I'm reflecting on it, maybe that's just its own story and its own limited version of the truth. But I do think that the wealth of information that we pull from folklore and mythologies and all the various ways that we try to make sense of the world is there's real wealth in that. I mean, just listening to you talk, like, it's undeniable that as you eat, breathe, and sleep this, and you are this, and there's this real richness in it, real yumminess to kind of swim around in. Of that I think we're that we are all hungry for, and how it's hard to see sometimes when you have your 9-to-5 job and your kids go to school and and it's like you don't even feel like you have a minute to breathe, and here you are telling stories of traipsing through and seeing fairies and all this other stuff. Like, sometimes I know for some folks it feels like those worlds are so incredibly separated and so far apart. And there's magic in weaving them together. What if people are listening to you right now and their experience of their lives has been anything but that? How can they start taking some steps into that space?
This journey started for me, the true journey into the world of folklore. It didn't really start the day that I was told I had to go and do something, that I had to go collect these stories. It really, I think it started for me early on when my grandmother was, in her kitchen when she's sitting and she's stirring her pot by the stove, and the steam's kind of coming up, and we actually have a land grant in Virginia from the King of England, and our ancestors are buried in the backyard there. So it's so I knew I had this deep history, and there was a certain point when I was in England and everything was going right. I had this degree, I was healthy, my relationship was good, everything was right, but there was this emptiness inside that I couldn't quite deal with. And I think maybe this is one of the threshold times that you're talking about, where I'm teetering. I was an academic. I was a little bit worried about being too far out there, which I guess I got over. But anyway, at the time I was teetering, and I'm like, what is this part of me that's so sad? Like, what is this? Like, why? What is this emptiness? And I think what I decided to do was to ask it questions, which we can call gestalt. There are actually names for this sort of thing, where you actually go inside and you start saying, well, who are you and why are you empty? And it was loss. There was this feeling of deep loss. And I think it really was my disconnection from the land that, who knows where it came from? Maybe it was just being in an academic environment and being too heady. I don't know. But all of a sudden when I started to respond to it, and I went, oh, I can take my shoes off and walk with the sacred stones, and suddenly I feel differently. Now, sort of back to the sort of everyday world, when I, just after that was a single mother raising a child by myself and trying to do all this and really had no time for anything. It was so good to be able to do the dishes while singing, or do the dishes while listening to folklore. I also just love listening to folklore. I'll put audibles on and just listen to all kinds of people tell stories, because, in the old bardic sense, if we go back to a time when we were really rooted and we really did have initiation periods, and we really thought about all the, the 9-year-old change and the 12-year-old change, and these different phases that we go through, even death, we have that final change. The bards were required to learn 250 stories of their people. You weren't called a bard until you knew that many stories. And there was a reason behind it. They're not fluffy. Some of them are, but the basic reason was that if you knew that many stories, you had what it took when you were confronted with a difficult situation. Something happens, and if you know the story, you go, this is how I respond, because you know how the heroes and the heroines in your tradition react. And so I think this is very important. And in that same Celtic tradition, it was only after that amount of time, when you'd learned that many stories, or you had so many PhDs, right, that you were able to then become maybe a person you listen to. So over a 20-year period, there was something that you would actually do, a way that you would step through, so that you would eventually become the hero or heroine, the leader of your tribe. And you had the full tree. You had your roots, you knew your ancestors, you had the upper branches, you knew your guardians, and who you knew the people or the beings that were guiding you, or your own direct intelligence. And so you were a whole being when you stepped out and started calling yourself a teacher or healer. And and I think in our culture, a lot of people take weekend workshops and then boom, right? And it
it feels like this would be a really bad conversation for you and I to get on about it. Absolutely, I cannot agree with you more. This is, yes, please continue your thought, but I'm dying over here laughing.
Well, and I'm not saying, I don't want to stop anyone from their process. We all have a way of unfolding, and it's all different, and it's wonderful. But getting your roots and getting your tradition, I think, is very, very important. And sometimes it's great just to turn on your phone and just record yourself speaking. Like, what kind of stories are you telling? Are you telling stories that are empowering you? Even we can have quite difficult stories about the past. That was one thing I have in actually Heroines of Avalon and Other Tales. There's a story of Blue Dywith, and Blue Dywith is accused of being a murderer and an adulteress. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to work with this one? But in the process of getting to know her and working with her story, you absolutely understand why she does what she does. And she gets to also choose again. But we realize in the retelling of her tale, we actually, even if something really difficult has happened to us, we can choose how we speak about it. We can say, that was a learning experience, and this is what I got out of it, instead of telling a tale of bitterness. And so one thing I think Blue Dywith teaches us is forgiveness is really important, because the moment we forgive someone, we just drop heavy suitcases. We drop things that we no longer need, and we free ourselves to live a beautiful life. We don't need to carry difficult stories around with us. And I think that's one of the really powerful things around storytelling. Also, you can change your archetype. I mean, you can be living to do a different tradition, most of us know Persephone. We can be living, and she tends to take us down sort of drug addict route, and you can go, wait a second, I don't really want to hang out in the underworld all the time. Maybe I'd rather carry a Pallas Athena archetype and be a contribution to humanity. So people in a way want to dismiss folklore, but if you think about it, like the story of the Cailleach, which is in Legends of the Grail, the last story in Legends of the Grail, it's the old woman of the world. Now, this is a 10,000-year-old story. It's been told by generation and generation and generation for over 10,000 years. We get 100 if we're lucky, so she's very old. And so when we're connected to these ancient archetypes, in some way we become wiser. We're connecting to this ancient lineage that can inform us now. And the old woman of the world, the Cailleach, who you find if you go questing, if you do the heroine's quest. She's the one that has a big pot and she stirs all the seeds of the world, but she understands the potency of the seed. She understands all of life and how it works. So if we're really interested in the culture of death, no, we're not going to be interested in her. But if we're really interested in the culture of life and how we thrive and how we live on this planet in a way in which all beings thrive, all genders, all races, all animals, all creation thrives, then yes, tapping in to an archetype like the Kaliach is very important to be able to do.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's so much in that, and it brings to my awareness the whole kind of social media world and internet world of the experts, which really was at the root and the heart of a lot of our due diligence work coming out of the counter intel arena. Businesses came to us, and asked us to do for them what we had done for the government. We didn't really see the connection at all, but what we discovered was a lot of what you're speaking to, which is it's so easy to make yourself out to be an expert. And there were real problems happening for businesses when they didn't have any sort of a discernment process in that. And that seems real like dry and compared to the richness that you're just talking about. But it started to open up this whole inquiry around like what's really going on here and what are the perhaps the unintended consequences of moving into that space. And it led into, when you have a child who's in the public eye, and there's certain aspects of social media and internet and business and stuff that all kind of link together. And one of the things that we talk about extensively in our home is, what are you putting into the world? And when you choose to use a platform to kind of vomit all of your insecurities and fears and heaviness and all this stuff to the world, in my estimation, it's irresponsible. And people treat it like their own kind of therapy, but they're doing it under the guise of empowerment and knowing something. And, so we take real responsibility with making sure that the full experience has been held and the synthesis has occurred prior to using the story of it in a way that is presented as being helpful to anybody. Right. Because otherwise it's just a mask for your own fear and insecurity as you're moving through it. And you can feel that, every time I log onto social media, it's like my own little sociological experiment of like, well, what's happening in the world today, and people not realizing everything they're broadcasting through how they choose to communicate and tell stories. And that's something that, we've just drilled into Neva is like when you speak as that, what are you putting good into the world, or are you contributing to the alternative? And certainly it goes way beyond putting on a happy face and everything, but it comes from the richness of truly living your existence and study and being and exploring at the depths, certainly not the 20-year barred tradition, but taking as much ownership and accountability as you can in that processing. And that's what we shape all of our coaching and everything else around, is making sure that there's accountability and transparency and growth and evolution and all everything you're speaking to. And so that's why I was laughing, like this, we could probably talk for days on the importance of really deconstructing some of what we're seeing in the world right now. And I love that you added in the component of, for sure, I made mistakes. For sure, I stepped on toes and hurt people. And for sure, there's value in both the forgiveness component of that, but making sure that you're using that toward an end, that you're not throwing it out and hiding it and pretending it didn't happen, but rather making sure that it means something, making sure that it wasn't in vain, making sure that you're learning the lessons and then integrating it rather than just repeatedly doing damage to people and not really seeing the connection or taking ownership of it. So there's a lifetime of conversations in just that bit that you just shared. I want to leave folks with the kind of the idea of two components. It seem like we're saying opposite things, but really they tie together nicely. Is the value in having the courage to walk your path and to be in that and to explore and to take yourself out of your comfort zone and to, sometimes that means, helping somebody who's just a couple steps behind you and doing it even when you don't feel like you're ready, and committing to the continued learning and the continued journeying. And I think there's a real delicate balance to be both the teacher and the student always, and to be okay in what would seem to be a contradiction, but really is the nature of our existence. What would you like to add on to that, maybe as we leave people on this episode?
Well, I think, empowerment and having superpowers and these things we're talking about is very important. Another piece to it, I always know when I go to a sacred site that I'm really going to get the most out of this when I'm humble. When I'm really humble, and humility really means not being less than who you are or being more than who you are, but being exactly who you are. So there's a piece of authenticity. So when you use a word, you have to realize it's a vibration, it's a sound. I'm really, in this moment, I'm speaking to you, I'm sending you some sort of music that I hope in some way, registers and that your own internal world works within you in some way. But our words really act as magic, if you think about it. There's what you can say one word, and you can see it in all different kinds of different experiments when you sing to a plant, for instance, and it blossoms. And we have to remember that when we speak to each other, that's what we're doing all the time. I'm gonna say I love you, and maybe you blossom. And and I might tell you a story, and maybe that excites something within you, and then you run off and you create your own book or your own story, your own TV show, or whatever happens, right? So we can influence each other in ways that are incredibly positive. And also, if we notice that I'm off track or you're off track or something's not quite right, we can share feedback and help each other grow in ways that are very constructive. And so words can be, words are very powerful. Very, very powerful. I had a teacher who used to say, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can kill you. And I can also say words can really help you live, so there's that part. But do you know what I mean? We want to really, even today, if just for the next hour, we really think, what are our thoughts right now? What are we writing in our journals? How am I speaking to my partner right now? What am I creating? Our words create the reality that we live into. I'll just leave you with that. I'll say it again. Our words create the reality that we live into.
Beautiful. Yes. We call it spelling for a reason, folks. There's a lot more happening there than we're willing to face. So delightful to chat with you. I feel like we have a lot more conversations to unfold together, and I just really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wealth of wisdom and the depth of your knowledge with our audience. Let's tell people again where they can go to find out more about you.
Yes, you can go to my website. It's AYN is my first name, AynCatesSullivan.com. And Cates is Cates, and then Sullivan, Sullivan. So AynCatesSullivan.com, and you can find me on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Most bookstores will have me, and I'm on all kinds of social media. So if you just want to go and listen to more wild Celtic tales, then you can go onto my website and look on media or audios, and there's lots there to listen to. So thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, it was my delight for sure. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate your loyalty. And until next time, go out, uncover your superpowers, and change the world. Take care, everyone.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.